If you find yourself in a situation where neo-Nazi groups and white supremacist organizations are cheering you on and the decisions you make, it might give you an indication that you're on the wrong side. Now, for most normal people, that would be the obvious conclusion. But this is the Trump regime, and when it comes to the Trump regime, that sort of cheerleading is congratulations for a job well done. So why are white supremacist groups cheering? They're cheering because the Trump administration decided that it was a good idea to charge and indict the Southern Poverty Law Center with fraud because the SPLC paid confidential informants who belong to white supremacist groups to infiltrate their organizations and share their secrets to the SPLC so that the SPLC could take them down. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with the work that the SPLC has done, the SPLC is responsible for busting up the Klan along with a number of other white supremacist groups. So the idea and the argument that the DOJ of the Trump regime is making is that the SPLC is actually a funder of domestic terrorism. Now, let's understand the implications of what this means. The DOJ and the Trump regime, on the one hand, has freed thousands of domestic terrorists, 1,500 of them who stormed the Capitol that have ties to multiple neo-Nazi and white supremacist groups. Those people were pardoned, and now the regime is indicting and prosecuting an organization that is designed to take those organizations down. Keep in mind, the Trump regime has long flirted with all sorts of white nationalists and racist organizations throughout their entire history. Everybody remembers Charlottesville. Everybody remembers the dinners at the White House with Nick Fuentes. Everybody remembers how the language of the regime during the campaign and during their time in the Oval Office was overtly and covertly coded to mirror language and rhetoric that was common in 1930s Germany. And let's also not forget that this regime has made overt callbacks and dog whistles to all sorts of white nationalist rhetoric. You only need to look at some of the Homeland Security propaganda that was put out. You only need to look at the use of Confederate-era symbolism in multiple areas of their operations and marketing campaigns. This is a regime that loves the Confederacy. This is a regime that is in love with white nationalism. This is a regime that is full of people who have overt and covert ties to white nationalist organizations. And many of them have positions of power and influence within the regime. So when we learn that this regime is prosecuting an entity that goes after domestic terrorists like this, it all makes sense. Now, with Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche and the FBI going after the SPLC, a lot of neo-Nazi and accelerationist organizations have been cheering this along because it means that one of the major thorns in their side gets taken off the board. One member of a white nationalist group belonging to the American Futurist noted in a Telegram chat that they see it as a win for them. There might be some short-term negative impact because of the news cycle, but they get the benefit of fewer traitorous snakes in their movement. So having the SPLC sidelined is a win for members of this organization. And the reasoning that the regime used for leveling the indictment is just absolutely silly. They're making the argument that because the SPLC was using confidential informants to gain intel and take down these organizations from the inside, the regime is making the argument that the SPLC was funding domestic terrorism. That is laughable. No sane person would believe that to be even remotely true. But then again, we're talking about an entire regime of unqualified, unintelligent boobs who are owned by various interests that are enemies of the United States. What's particularly hilarious about this is that members of these groups are saying things like this. The SPLC was not funding racist groups to enable their racism. They, in fact, were not funding racist groups at all. What they were doing was funding bad actors within these groups with the intention of destroying those groups from the inside. This is an actual member of a white nationalist and neo-Nazi group saying that. It's not an SPLC spokesman. So when the targets of these infiltration efforts are saying these sorts of things, and you have the DOJ presenting this story that they are indicting the organization for fraud, it's absolutely laughable. It remains to be seen if this will even get any traction. The SPLC has vowed to fight this politically motivated prosecution. But one thing that we have to keep in mind is that this is a signal on some of the things that are coming. This is clearly this regime using the power of the Department of Justice to politically prosecute its opponents. It sends a chilling message to any other civil rights organizations that are out there fighting the good fight in opposition to this regime. We've seen instance after instance after instance of this regime giving aid and comfort to some of the worst groups in society. We've seen this regime bend over backwards to give grace to some of the worst domestic terrorists that this country has seen. And this is yet another example of how this regime is actively behaving against the interest of the average American. There can be no doubt going forward that the regime occupying the Oval Office is the enemy of the American people. They point the finger at their political opposition as the enemy from within. The real enemy from within is occupying the Oval Office.